Hello, Trevor. Are you here?
I am here. How you doing, Kate?
I'm doing great. I can't believe this is working. This is such a technical marvel that we're engaged in right now. I'm pasting a little comment in here so everybody will know the name of this conversation. There we go. Done. We have a title now, I think.
Oh, beautiful. It's nice to see so many friends showing up here too.
I know, it's lovely. Oh, Altman Siegel's there. Hi, guys. Oh, hi, friends. It's so lovely. This is great. We can see you all. We can see into your homes. Um, well, hi Trevor, how are you
Hi
doing?
there.
This
I'm
is
okay. I have a little bit of stage fright, which is super weird because I give talks all the time and all we're sort of doing is talking on a phone, but I am strangely nervous about this.
yeah, I have to say it's an extremely odd format. It's lovely to see you though. It feels like such
Yeah.
an incredibly heartbreaking time, and this is such a weird way to be touching base
Yeah.
with friends. But hi, lovely
Yeah.
to see you.
Hello. Hello. We're all on our like astronaut International Space Station
Exactly.
communication platforms here. But yeah,
Exactly.
it is a different place. It feels like a couple of weeks ago we were in Paris doing our big show about facial recognition and its history.
Mhm.
And yeah, and the year was going crazy, and then it just got all turned off.
Yeah, I have to say, January feels like it was about 5 years ago now. So I
Yeah,
can't imagine how time is feeling for you. But I do remember we did that show in Paris. It was lovely. And
yeah,
now, of course, France is in a recession and you wouldn't be able to fly there if you wanted to. But the other thing I was thinking about recently was the show that we did at Fondazione Prada in the second half of last year, because, of course,
yeah,
that's in Milan. And
yeah,
so many of the people that we worked with, from the curators to the art handlers to the installers, have just been going through hell. And of course, now we're just 6 weeks behind them. So I'm
yeah.
currently in New York. I think you're in New York too now, right?
Yeah, I'm at my studio in Brooklyn. So I have a small studio here in Brooklyn where I work a lot, and then the big studios in Berlin. You know, but yeah, Northern Italy is it's really messed up. We I was going to have a big show open in Turin, I think last month. It was all, it's this giant hangar-sized place. It was going to be all the full-sized models of the different kind of satellites that I built over the years. And we were supposed to go and install, and I was like, you know what? Probably this feels sketchy. Like, no, it's okay, it's okay. And then, a week later, it's like, no, no way. And that
Wow.
the space there at OGR has actually been recently repurposed as a hospital. So
You're kidding. So the
yeah,
museum has become a hospital. They
yeah,
really, the huge
yeah,
one in Torino.
yeah. So that they turned that into a hospital, and just basically every show has been either kind of delayed or canceled, and yeah, it's sort of like it's a whole different world, and just really dramatically too. It just almost felt like almost like overnight. It's like, whoa, okay,
Right. Yeah, I mean here in the I'm in Greenwich Village right now, and it's completely silent apart from the occasional ambulance siren. And then of course at 7 o'clock we all go outside and we cheer and scream and bash on pots and
mm,
pans to say thank you to all of the care workers who are doing the really hard job right now.
yeah,
But other than that, it's the strangest feeling being in New York, and obviously it's a really, really hard time for the city. So we're all pretty heartbroken. But of course, the
hmm
thing that's also really on my mind is what's happening in the art world, because I
hmm
mean, you've had shows cancelled, you've got like the whole year is in doubt now, but you also
hmm
employ a lot of people. I mean, you've got two studios, you've got the one there in New York, you've got the one in
hmm
Berlin. How are you dealing with that? Like, how are you guys coping?
I'm not gonna lie, it's like really stressful.
Yeah, I figured.
The good news, if there is any, I mean, there's two things, I guess. One is that so I have a bunch of people. I mean, it's not a bunch. There's a small handful of people that work for me and they all work in the studio in Berlin. And fortunately, the German government has a program that's called Kurzarbeit, where if your hours are reduced, the government will pay 60% of your salary.
Right.
And so everybody in the studio has gone down to half time but are still getting about 75 or 80% of their normal salaries. So that's good, and that's sustainable for longer than it would have been otherwise. But I have, certainly have friends with much bigger studios that just had to furlough everybody, and I think that's pretty common. Is just that overnight, everybody's losing their jobs, in a lot of cases, because nobody knows when projects are going to start coming up again, or whether there's going to be income. And I think there is that, sense of not knowing what's going to happen. Well, so I guess the one part of it is the good news is that people that work for me are employed in Germany, which has a much stronger social safety net. You don't get that same sense of fear that you're starting to feel here now, or certainly I'm starting to feel here now.
Right.
So it's a little bit less intense,
Absolutely right. I mean, here it's extraordinary. We just found out that, of course, the federal government, the Trump administration, has decided to stop subsidizing COVID testing, the COVID testing sites in all of the states, and it's now up to the states, which is, absolutely extraordinary and terrifying. And again, it's just that sense of just having an X-ray put on the societies in which we live and being able to see right into this terrifying degree of inequality, of precarity, of the difference between people who are, extraordinarily at risk right now, people who are like delivery workers, people who are in hospitals, and everybody who's at home, sheltering and terrified. I mean, it's I think in particularly New York, but really across the US right now, people are really feeling that precarity and are really feeling that lack of a vision for how a society is going to change, and it is going to change. I mean, that's the thing that's really clear now.
Yeah, I mean, and I think that if there's one other thing that ameliorates it a little bit, is the sense of like a lot of people being in this together.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like just like everybody I know who's in the artist side of things or on the gallery side of things, is everybody's kind of screwed and nobody knows what's going to happen, but it's not, at least there's not this like, oh, haha, like so-and-so screwed something up or this or that, there's none. There is maybe just a kind of sense of solidarity, which is weirdly feels good, and it is one of these extraordinary things that can happen in times of crises. And someone like Rebecca Solnit talks about this a lot, is that there are all these ways in which, there are spaces where you can try out new things, and there are, different forms of care that can emerge from times like these if we want to be optimistic.
I think that's right. I mean, I'm thinking of the work of people like Amy Kapczynski, who really has been doing extraordinary work in the field of public health. And she's sort of writing about what does an ethics of care look like in a moment like this? How do we care for each other? How do we show up for each other? And to see like the real resurgence in mutual aid networks has been one of the things that's been keeping me going. I mean, there's so much of that happening in New York right now, but also around the world. To see rent strikes, I think rent strikes that are working is really fantastic. But I'm going to take a pause here because we now have a very full channel, and I'm going to introduce us and tell you why we're all here.
Oh, okay.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to the PACE Instagram live channel. My name is Kate Crawford. I'm a distinguished research professor at NYU, where I was the co-founder and am the co-founder of the AI Now Institute. And I'm delighted to be having this conversation with my friend and collaborator, Trevor Paglen.
Hi there, I'm Trevor Paglen, and I'm an artist, and that's about all I have to say.
An artist who's freaking out right now, like the rest of us. Tell us a little bit about the shows that you had coming up that are now maybe not happening.
Yeah, well, I mentioned the show in Italy that I'm super excited about. It's again, this giant, almost hangar-like space, and the show was all the full-size models of these different reflective satellites that I've built over there. So these giant sculptures of these mirrorized structures with panels and stuff like that. It was going to look like almost a cross between like a hangar bay or something like that, or like an aircraft hangar, but then with these really bizarre, and I sheepishly say that they're quite beautiful objects, and then I have the other big project that was coming out this month was one I've been working on for quite some time, which is a project looking at computer vision and AI, and looking at some of the stuff that you and I have done a lot of work around, and looking at that in relation to 19th century like American Western photography. So trying to think about, can you locate something like artificial intelligence or computer vision within a history of photography that would, begin with figures like Timothy O'Sullivan, doing survey photographs from the Department of War in the 19th century, and then moving through someone like Muybridge, who's starts as a landscape photographer, also working for the Department of War, photographing like the Indian Wars, and then of course doing the famous motion studies. And the motion studies kind of set off a history of technology and a history of, kind of technologically enhanced vision that I think you can make the argument goes up until the present in things like computer vision, AI, what have you. So it's so the project's been going back to a lot of these sites of classical kind of Western frontier photography, and then using in the studio, we built a lot of software to visualize what different computer vision algorithms are doing. So you're seeing a lot of these landscapes that are then showing you the landscape, but then also the landscape as it is seen through different computer vision systems. So we can say, like, let's look at, a tree in Yosemite through the eyes of a guided missile or something like that, and it will make an image like that. But it's a fun project, and it's, it's tricky at this moment where you're like, okay, who knows when this thing's going to open? It's all done. Right. I like the project. So thinking about how do you share that with people,
Well,
and
can I make a crazy suggestion? I'm not sure, we haven't really planned this, Trevor, so forgive me if this is a bit out of order, but do you have anything there you could show us? I mean, for those of us who'd love to see some of these images, do you have any of the printed works that you could show on Instagram?
Yeah, I can, 1 second here, 1 second.
Great. Hi everybody, it's lovely to see you in the comments.
These aren't works from the show, but so one of the things that I'm doing with that body of work is going back, and a lot of them I'm printing as like in 19th century styles. So doing things like album and prints and carbon prints, and using these really old classical styles. So it's like the process, like shooting with an 8x10 camera, taking that film, digitizing the film, running it through these computer vision systems, and then going back to a film output and then making these contact prints using, like egg whites and silver nitrate and stuff like that. So I had my own darkroom where I was making these things for a while, and this is kind of what an album and print looks like. This is not from the series. This is from an earlier series, but you get that sense, and these are kind of what other ones look like. And then but yeah, I'm super happy about it. But again, we'll see what happens.
So how do you make an album and print? Where do you do that?
Oh man, well nowadays I work with this guy named Barrett Oliver, who's a guy who specializes in this. So you're the Guggenheim, and you need some prints done in the style of the 19th century. This is the guy that you go to, and he's a really interesting guy. He lives on this kind of like weird farm outside of LA, and he like raises his own chickens so that he can make the album, and you kind of go to his house and it feels like you're in the 19th century. Wow. But he's just really, really talented guy, and just can tell you everything about all the different techniques for 19th century printing. So I've been hanging out with him doing that. But I learned how to do it initially by building a darkroom to do it in my bathroom and making a giant mess, but like sitting there like beating eggs, for days at a time, and then mixing in all these chemicals. I mean, it's very alchemical, and very material, and it's sort of,
it sounds like a perfect COVID-19 project, Trevor. You should basically raise chickens, start making album and prints in your backyard. If any of us had backyards in New York, we could totally do that.
Yeah, I think that's really real, and I think one of the things that is certainly on my mind, and I think on a lot of artists' mind, is related to that question, is just how many things that we think we understand the meaning of, like they're just changing overnight. Like, the other day I was at the beach, so I was filming some stuff for this other project that I was thinking about, and I looked up and was seeing planes fly out of JFK, and I was like, oh, whoa, airplanes, like they just mean something really different now, like that image of the airplane in the sky. And so that's just really weird to be an artist right now, because all of these images that you work with and the language that you have, like the meaning of it is really changing really quickly,
Right.
And yeah, so I'm thinking about that a lot, and it's a really challenging, it's really challenging, but I think that is a part of what your job is, maybe as an artist, to try to notice that stuff. And it's funny that you mentioned the album and prints being a COVID kind of project, because it does seem to me that, I don't know, it seems to me like working at that scale feels about right now, so I don't know, it's a really sad time.
I think there's something about having really personal projects that we can actually make in this obviously with those prints, they're one-offs, so you're making these interventions that are inherently really personal.
That's absolutely true. And what about you? I know you're finishing up a book, and I imagine the meaning of that is like changing as well,
Oh yeah, obviously, so I co-lead the AI Now Institute at NYU, and we are a team of almost 30 people, and it's been really hard to sort of think about how we do this now. Now, fortunately, we decided to send everyone into a working from home state 2 weeks before the work from home order in New York. So we're really proud of getting people home safe. And we have a lot of projects that are really relevant to this right now. So we have one of our postdocs, Liz Casanuas, is looking exactly at issues of AI and healthcare, and so much of this is happening right now through contact tracing. Many governments, including in Israel and Hungary, are doing these, I think, quite concerning projects, which are forcing people to give up their data to be, tracked in space, but also in terms of who they're contacting, to make databases which are centralized by the government. So there's a whole lot of projects that we've been investigating at AI Now. We also have Erin McElroy, another postdoc, who specifically works on issues around rent strikes and around what's been happening with gentrification in Oakland and also here in New York City. And actually their projects could not be more relevant right now, when we all feel, I think, really precarious about our housing, and we're starting to see the cleavages between who has so much right now and who are in sort of positions of such wealth and privilege, and those of us who are in much more unstable situations. And so they've been researching that for years, and creating maps. Essentially, if you look at anti-eviction maps on Twitter, you'll actually get to see these maps that have been building for many years now. And of course, those eviction maps are going to be looking really scary in a couple of months from now in the US.
No, absolutely.
Yeah. So, it's just been, I couldn't have been more excited to be working with the people that I'm working with. They're also creating a lot of mutual aid projects right now, as well as really stress testing the surveillance systems and asking a lot of critical questions about how people are getting surveilled right now.
And I'm thinking about your work so much right now too. It's funny that earlier today, so I teach a class at the University of Georgia, and we were doing it remotely today, and we were doing Foucault's Panopticon, which is the essay that's very kind of standard. What I had totally forgotten until I reread that section of the book today is that it starts out with a description of the Black Plague, and it's talking about what regulations were being put in place to kind of quarantine people, and you can't leave your house under the pain of death, and you have to show up at the window every day and kind of show that you're healthy, and it was crazy to see that the resonance between that and today, and the particular point that was being made is that in that case, so to use the kind of Foucauldian language, that the plague is like a perfect environment in which to institute new kinds of surveillance and new kinds of discipline, because you can kind of do it in the name of public health and things that are like good and that are matters of life and death. But of course, once you've created those systems, they have a tendency to stick around. right? And I'm imagining this is something that you're thinking about a lot right now as we're seeing governments, wanting to track everybody's cell phones and, things like that in the name of public health.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because, I'm writing this book at the moment called Atlas of AI, and one of the chapters sort of looks specifically at the close relationship between the AI industry and the state, and specifically the military. Of course, that was the place where AI was really funded and created by DARPA in the sort of the 50s and 60s. But even now, we're starting to see this kind of very close sort of militarization of the AI industry and AI sector. And what we've been seeing with the Trump administration is that they've been inviting companies like Palantir, who I think are doing deeply problematic projects, particularly at the border and particularly tracing and deporting immigrants in the US, and inviting them in and saying, help us design a system to deal with COVID-19. And they've also invited Clearview AI, would you believe? The company that has, basically dragnet harvested the entire internet for all of our images, and without any consent or any permission is creating giant policing databases. And I don't know if you saw this, Trevor, but there was a story that came out this week that actually traced Clearview AI to all the people who are working there, to find out they have these deep connections to the far right. And we're talking about like the really extreme neo-reactionary dark enlightenment version of the far right working at Clearview AI. And these are the people who now have access to the highest levels of government to think about how our devices are going to be tracking us. So I'm extremely worried about what we're seeing there. And I think it's something that we should all be talking about and thinking about how we're going to organize around.
I mean, I think that is so right. And that freaks me out so much. I think we and you gave a talk, I think in New Zealand last year or 2 years ago. And it was all about different monsters in AI. And I remember one of the monsters was the monster that's in your room, like when you're calling, the phone, like the
call is coming from inside the house.
The call is coming from inside the house, exactly. And there was a section about the rise of like basically far right culture within tech companies, and you're just seeing that more and more. And like every time now I go to San Francisco, I see it more and more. I'm like, what the fuck is this shit?
Right.
And weirdly, a friend of mine, a journalist named A.C. Thompson, who tracks. He writes for ProPublica and has done a lot of reporting about the rise of like fascism, basically, and tracking those kinds of groups. He's someone who's never done technology, but now he's getting interested in these technology sectors and these kind of basically fascist ideologies within technology companies as well. So it's really real and really intense. And so we have that on this kind of state side and this just horrifying politics side, but also in terms of like just the everyday tools that we use. I'm thinking a lot about the fact that I'm in fucking endless Zoom meetings and like just like why the fuck did like Zoom become this thing? And Zoom's a fucking piece of malware. You know what I mean? Like, and so what is that encroachment though as well? Like how do you see that playing out?
Well, I mean, it's interesting because we're living in this period where we're seeing the collapse of the social fabric, and you're seeing this sort of shift of work culture to home as though that's something which could be sort of immediately normalized. And of course it can't. I mean, the things that support the practice of going to work every day is that we have all of these other systems that we rely on, from schools to childcare to extended friend networks to being able to, get our food and to be able to cook for others that we care for. So many things have actually sort of collapsed in this moment that this idea that we all just go home and work from home at the same level of productivity that we always had, I think is a farce. I also think it's incredibly dangerous that we're assuming that people under enormous stress and duress are somehow able to be doing 6 hours of Zoom calls a day, which is personally what I'm doing right now, and it's driving me crazy. So when we start imagining the new future that we want to come on the other side of this, can we please have fewer Zoom calls? I think that would be a really great start. But
do you think they're? Oh
yeah, no, please.
I was going to say that, but do you think that creates a kind of even crazier golden age of data harvesting, in the sense like now you do have all these people using online platforms? I imagine that if I was Skype or I was a Zoom, I'm wanting to start creating training sets from those calls. I'm wanting to,
Right.
build affect training sets based on, oh, I know that somebody's distressed. Like, what does the timbre of their voice look like? What, what does the movements of their face look like? And I'm wondering the extent to which the fact that we've been forced onto these online platforms represents not only a consolidation of power in terms of like economic sector, but in terms of the kinds of values that are built into those infrastructures and the ethics that are built into those. And that's something that we've talked about a lot.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, we should explain to people who are
We should
joining
probably
us
explain that.
about how affect recognition works, and it's something that it's often in the sort of the back end of a system. You won't see it, but these are systems that essentially are tracking your facial movements as you speak on video. So, like what we're doing now, Trevor, an affect recognition system would be looking at what are called the sort of micro movements of our face, and then mapping that to to hundreds or hundreds of thousands of videos to try and make assumptions around how your external expressions of emotion relate to your true inner state. And it's interesting because, of course, this technology is highly questioned right now. We can actually, something that I've done and something that I'm doing in this book is going back and tracing where affect detection came from. And you can really sort of go all the way back into sort of the 1960s and 70s to really sort of track the work of one psychologist called Paul Ekman, who believed that there are essentially 6 universal emotions, and we sort of show them on our faces. Like, we're happy, we have a smile, we go like this.
Camera to turn back the other way. Okay, there we go. No, we were looking at, so you were talking about Paul Ekman, whose research kind of underlies this. And I think Ekman was making photographs, right? And then he was showing the photographs he'd go to like Papua New Guinea and be like, here's a picture of somebody making a face. Like, what is that face? And so that's part of the method that he used to try to get this theory of universal emotions, right?
That's right. I mean, he was essentially, and he was not trained as an anthropologist, but he was going up into the hinterlands of Papua New Guinea and taking these pictures of people making really sort of cartoonish expressions and then showing them to tribes who had lived sort of remotely and hadn't been exposed to modern media to see if he could get reactions. And his first attempt at doing this was a complete failure, but he kept developing it. And then this idea became so prevalent in psychology, even though it was deeply disputed. I mean, people like Margaret Mead were deeply critical of it. But in machine vision and in basically in AI, because it's a metric, because we can say there are 6 emotions and we can map them to faces, it got picked up, and it's sort of been built into technical systems, even though it's completely disputed. And frankly, I think it should be disputed. I think it's completely unscientific. But now people are using it in hiring contexts. So, when you go for a job interview, someone's videoing you, and then by looking at your facial expressions, deciding if you're somebody who would be a good employee.
Right.
It's
it is like those
disturbing.
old, it's like those old 19th century drawings of like the person with the big forehead be like, a good father, you know what I mean? Or like, like the old phrenology drawings. To me, it seems like that, and then we talk about that in some of the Paris stuff as well.
Yeah, it's definitely phrenological. I love that somebody in the comments, by the way, just said that like emojis are the latest kind of experience of Ekman's 6 standard emotions.
I do. I think that's right, and I think one of the things that we have talked about, and we wrote about this a little bit. We wrote an article together called "Excavating AI," which was trying to look at the politics of the images that are used to train AI systems, right? So you were talking about these photographs Ekman would make and show them to people around the world. Well, now what they do is make photographs like that and show them to computers to try to get them to recognize different emotional states or different objects or what have you. And these are called training images, right? And so we wrote a whole essay on the politics of these images. And I think where we landed with that, feels like a pretty relevant point to me right now, which had to do with the fundamental question being about what do images mean, right? And who gets to decide what images mean, and who gets to hardwire those into technical systems, and therefore, kind of juice those systems to see in very particular kinds of ways that have forms of power built into them. Right. And I wonder if all of us sitting here at home and trying to work as remotely as possible are subjecting ourselves to those forms of power to a far greater extent than we might realize on one hand, and on the other hand, helping to create a situation in which those systems can expand greatly.
I think that's right. And I mean, it's interesting because, of course, somebody has just said in the comments that, who gets to decide what those images mean, and are we seeing, forms of bias propagate? And I think bias is kind of like the very top layer. Bias is absolutely built into these systems. But I think what's even more interesting when you go down through the layers of how technical systems are constructed is that ultimate question of who decides what an image means. And because images are so multi-chromatic and it can mean so many things, it's an extraordinary kind of hubris that we have systems that claim they can detect not just how we're feeling, but also our worth as employees or as artists, or you name it. So I think bringing that sort of critical capacity to opening up technical systems, which I know is something that you and I both do a lot of, Trevor, but showing that to people and showing it to people in an art context, I think is also really powerful. I mean, that was my experience of doing the Training Humans show.
I mean, I think that's what I like about doing this stuff in the art context. Is I think, like, if you're looking at it from an art perspective and you're looking at these images from that, you actually look at them. Like, let's look at these images that we're using to teach computers how to see. And you look at the images and you're like, this image has fucking nothing to do with whatever this computer scientist is saying.
Exactly.
Like, what are these decisions that are being made? They're just, it's often hilarious, but often just terrifying when you think about the implications of it. And it does come back to that question that you mentioned about who gets to decide what images mean. And I think anybody who thinks that they can decide what images mean is incredibly hubristic, because I can tell you that the meaning of an image like flowers that are blooming right now means something really different this spring than it meant last spring.
They really do. I mean, this is a perfect opportunity to talk a little bit about a project that we were both involved in and that you built, Trevor, called ImageNet Roulette, which I've been thinking of a lot recently because, of course, ImageNet Roulette, we decided to sort of keep it up on the internet for a brief period of time, and then it went absolutely viral. And now that's a word that none of us should be ever able to use, because viral is truly a thing that we do not want in our lives. But do you want to talk a little bit about ImageNet Roulette and what the motivation was behind that project?
Yeah, so I mean, ImageNet Roulette was a project that, it needs a little bit of a background to explain. I think it was, we were looking at the actual images that are used to train artificial intelligence systems. And these are data sets that can be anywhere from a couple of hundred images to millions of images. And ImageNet is a data set that is probably the most widely used publicly available data set, right? So Google has ones that are bigger and better. Facebook has ones that are bigger and better. We can't see those, but we can see ImageNet because it was made at Stanford University. It's kind of a benchmark. And I was just doing a project like, it's 22,000 categories and 14 million images. And so 14 million images are organized into 22,000 categories. And everybody in computer science was like, oh, it's so big, like nobody can actually look at this. It was like, sure you can, 22,000 categories. That's quarter the size of a book, but you can look at that in a day, for example, if you really stick to it. So that's what I was doing. And you had been doing some of this as well, and we were talking about it a lot, and we found there's about 2,800 something categories of people, right? So it'd be like cheerleader, and then a bunch of pictures of cheerleader, like Boy Scout, and a bunch of pictures of like little kids in Boy Scout uniforms or what have you. And then we found out that it gets really gnarly really quickly, because basically they just took a form of the dictionary and translated that into categories, and then had Amazon Turk workers put images in that. So they would have categories like cheerleader, scuba diver, things that we may or may not think are particularly controversial, but there's definitely ones that would be like bad person
Alcoholic,
slacker, and alcoholic, debtor,
kleptomaniac. Yeah.
exactly, and so what I did was to take all of those people categories and said, okay, let's train a model on all of these categories of people, and then just built an application where it'll tell you like who you are,
Right.
according to an ImageNet model trained on these. And what it was really was just meant to be a project that showed just how fucking bad it is. You know what I mean? And like how bad a lot of this artificial intelligence stuff is. And kind of that on one hand, and I think on the other hand, the corollary is like, what are the norms that are used in universities and research environments to make these kind of data sets? And and like just how quickly the creation of any kind of data set can go in really, really horrible directions unless people are really looking at what's being put in there. And the thing is that the scale of these things is so large that it's a lot of labor to actually look at them. And so what you have is generations of people creating training sets and then using the previous generation's material. So you see these like really bad, politics of classification built into training sets that just propagate through time and propagate to all kinds of other systems. So that's what that project was a way to just try to call that out. And of course it was, a funny way of doing that.
I mean, I'm so glad we included it in the show in Milan, because we could see people interacting it. And what I really liked about ImageNet Roulette is that we can talk at this abstract level about artificial intelligence and machine vision. But the reason why ImageNet Roulette was so powerful was that it was an app that you could play with, and it was a website that you could play with. So essentially what you could do is just upload a picture of yourself and then see how you would be categorized by ImageNet, the most cited, the most well-known training set in the world. And people were horrified because Black people were being classified very differently to white people, women were being classified very differently to men. The sorts of normative assumptions, the stereotypes, the slurs, the insults that were coming out of a landmark training set, like you didn't do anything to change the categories were there, and then people could see. And I think it was a really interesting way of, I think, doing exactly that excavation of a technical system, right? So it's funny, I've been thinking about that in relation to all of these Zoom calls and Hangouts and all of these technical systems that we're using right now to communicate with each other. They're recording us, and they're making, not only are they just capturing the data, but they're making training sets based on these videos. They're going to be making a whole lot of assumptions about who we are and what we're saying and what we're feeling. And I think that's the thing that worries me most about this moment in terms of the technical back end, that there hasn't been enough of public debate around what is an acceptable use of these systems and what's an acceptable use of our data.
And we've talked a fair amount about the book that you're working on. One of the things that I think is really great about the way that you're articulating what an AI system is that you're articulating it as something far broader than just like what's going on inside of a neural network. I mean, you're talking about infrastructure, you're talking about geography, you're talking about classification, you're talking about geology even, right?
That's right.
I mean, and so what are some of the aspects of AI according to Kate Crawford?
Well, I mean, I've always been interested, well, certainly for the last 10 years, in moving away from this idea of artificial intelligence as being essentially abstract code and a series of technical systems that are somehow in the cloud and dematerialized. And in actual fact, the opposite is true. Through years of research, I've been tracking the very material substrates of AI, about everything from where the systems are actually built, where we extract the minerals from, through to what it takes to actually make them work in terms of data extraction, and then where they end up, which is generally in massive e-waste tips in places like Ghana and Pakistan. And certainly one of the projects that I've really that really sort of, I think, gives you a sense of where the book begins, is a project that I did with Vladan Jola, which is called Anatomy of an AI System.
Yeah, right.
If you're listening right now, you could look it up on the internet. The whole thing is there. You'll be able to see this
That's a great
huge,
project,
it's a big visualization and an essay. And the visualization basically shows you the full life cycle, that sort of birth, life, and death of a single Amazon Echo unit, sort of the thing that Alexa lives inside. And to make one of these Echo units involves, a vast logistical chain. And so we traced that, and Vladan and I really sort of went to the places where these things were actually being constructed, from mining through smelting, through container shipping. And we also looked at the pay scales, like, how much does Jeff Bezos get paid per day versus how much does somebody who is a click worker get paid, for actually tracking through all of the ways in which Alexa is speaking, and is she getting the right words in the right order. It was really extraordinary. And so my book really is trying to do that at a large scale, and looking at how this pertains across the entire understanding of AI as something that is profoundly a system that is extractive in nature. And it's extracting not just our data, but it's also extracting vast amounts of natural resources and vast amounts of human labor that we don't see. So so that's what's it's obviously, it was interesting because of course that book was going to be coming out this year in September, and now it won't be, thanks to of course the massive collapse that's happening to the publishing industry, just like what you're talking about in the art world. The same is really happening across publishing as well.
I imagine academia. Well, I don't know. I mean, we're seeing. I wonder the extent to which academia is also insulated. I mean, we saw San Francisco Art Institute closed. I mean, certainly my classes in Georgia all kind of went online, but it kind of doesn't really work. I don't. I think that there are many, many layers of precarity that the longer that this goes on, the more and more that those are going to get peeled away. And I wonder, we all see those glimpses of different kinds of maybe solidarities that are emerging, or different kind of forms of care that are able to happen like in times of crises, because things kind of get thrown up in the air and people have to invent new rules or new ways of living together. I'm wondering if you're seeing aspects on the technology side of that happening, like particularly in the place that you work in.
Yeah, I mean, speaking of academia, I mean, wow, it's really hard out there. I mean, somebody just mentioned in the comments that, in London, the entire system is feeling like it's collapsing in terms of the universities there. We saw this week that Princeton is going through, a massive hiring freeze, and that they're saying that they're going to start possibly even laying off contractors and people who don't have tenure. We're seeing Yale also do similar things. Which, I mean, there's actually a Google Doc now that a series of academics are putting together, showing all of the universities that are going through hiring freezes. And when you look at this list, what is extraordinary about it is that it's hard to find any university that isn't. I mean, this is all universities right now. So, I mean, universities in some ways feel as though they're somehow more removed from the engines of capital and from this sort of complete precarity that we're seeing in, say, the service industries and the travel industries. But in actual fact, that they're profoundly exposed to market collapse, and also to foreign students. I mean, the way that certainly here in the US but also in Australia and in the UK, universities have been relying on foreign student income to really kind of prop up their budgets, and we're starting to see a collapse to that. So we're not going to see those sorts of really gigantic flows of capital in the way that we have in the past. And so what you're seeing now is universities shift immediately into online teaching without really anything by way of training their academics about how to do that, and let alone, the quality of education that students might be getting. And of course, many students are now saying, we want refunds. Like this is not what we paid for, and it's completely understandable. So I think universities are in a really difficult place right now, and I think it's going to get even more difficult when we see what happens in the fall, because there's no guarantee that come September, this is going to be resolved.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if there's anything hopeful about that, maybe it is that it's like the reevaluation of basically social safety nets. You know what I mean? And kind of like it, this has brought that into really stark relief. What are, communities and nations and places that have, functioning social services in place and which don't,
Right.
I mean, working between here and Germany, just the difference is dramatic.
Right.
A lot of friends of mine who are freelancers or artists, Germany set up a relief program within 24 hours.
Amazing.
People were getting checks, and here, I've been going out and just photographing and trying to get out of the house a little bit here, and you're seeing a rising sense of desperation on the streets, and it's intense. And I think this time certainly teaches us that a different world is not only possible, but probably necessary, and maybe that's a good thing.
And look, I couldn't agree more. I think if there's one thing that a pandemic and a truly global crisis like this gives us, is that all countries are impacted now. Everybody is impacted now. However, it's not a great leveler in any way. In actual fact,
absolutely.
This virus is absolutely hitting, Black and brown and low income communities so much harder. And it hasn't even yet really taken off in Africa and India in the way that it's going to. I mean, it's just to see how this is going to really highlight the levels of profound inequality is the thing that is most devastating. But I think it also is the most serious provocation to us to talk about how we design the worlds that we live in, and what does it mean to have, you could not have a better example for why we need universal health care. I mean, this absolutely. Is it. I mean, we have 8 million people out of work in America right now, and most of those people have health insurance through their employers. So, I mean, as somebody who grew up in Australia, I'm used to having, universal healthcare. You can get healthcare regardless of whether you're in work or not. And you just cannot have a moment like this without saying that it is essential that we completely reconstruct the way we're thinking about healthcare in the US. And I think across the board, I think there are so many areas where this is the moment for a deep political reassessment. And the other one, of course, is climate change. I mean, with all of these planes grounded, with all of industry on hold. I mean, have you seen the air quality lately? It's insane. Like New York, you can actually see the skyline. I'm like, what's going on? Like it's like a different city, but that's across the board. And one of the things I have on my phone actually is a air quality app that just tells me the air quality in cities all around the world and which ones have the worst air quality and which ones have the best. And the reason I had this, of course, was because I was going through the Australian fires just back in December and January. And it was so horrifying, and we couldn't breathe, and we were being evacuated. And so we were checking these apps every day, and we were seeing that we had air quality worse than had ever been seen in Beijing or Delhi because of the thick ash in the air from the fires. And so I was checking all of these numbers, and right now, if you look across the world, air quality has just gone way up and particulate has gone way down. So you're looking at the fact that we can stop the engines of constant production, and we're going to need to talk about what that looks like for so many reasons, because of healthcare, because of climate change, because of the way in which we structure our societies. And it's going to be a profound moment for really critiquing capital.
Absolutely. Well, I think we've gone over our allotted amount of time, and I think that's a great place to end it. It's just to end the conversation. I think it's just, again, just seeing, what are the possibilities, and what are the things that are that this moment is forcing us to urgently reassess, and is really underlying how serious it is.
I think that's right. And take care, Trevor. I hope you're
you too.
I hope you're doing okay there, and I hope you can find a way to you know, make those album imprints, like have a home project, set up your own dark
Yeah,
room.
I definitely have plenty of stuff to do here. Don't worry about me. It's always,
And
always
thank
keeping
you,
busy.
and thank you everyone for joining in. We can see you all in
Thank
the
you so
comments. There's
much.
been far too many questions to answer all of them, but please, you know, stay in touch, reach out, and I hope you're all doing okay and getting through this, because frankly, we are all going through this together, and it's just been really lovely to see you, friend.
Absolutely.
Hang
It's
in
great to
there.
see you, Kate. All right.
Okay,
Take
see you,
care,
Trevor.
everyone.
Bye,
Thank you so
everybody.
much.